Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps.
Today, we're going to get into a really massive political controversy. We're talking about lawmaker data privacy, federal investigations, and a brand new standard that guarantees U.S. senators, and only senators, at least $500,000 of taxpayer money.
It's a stunning piece of legislative maneuvering. Our sources show this single kind of self-serving piece of language was secretly inserted into a funding bill, one needed to end the government shutdown. What's so fascinating is how fast it blew up. The goal was supposedly institutional protection, but the political fallout, it was immediate and bipartisan.
Right. So our mission today is to really unpack this thing. People call it the Arctic frost provision, named after the investigation it was, I guess, designed to fight back against. We need to figure out what it demands from the DOJ and the FBI, why it was created in the first place, and, how that promise of retroactive cash just fractured everything on Capitol Hill. So let's dive right in. What exactly does this controversial new law require federal investigators to do?
It sets up completely new rules. Very explicit notification requirements for the Justice Department and the FBI, but specifically when they're dealing with the U.S. Senate.
Okay, so what kind of rules?
Well, for one, if the DOJ wants to put a senator under a criminal investigation, they have to notify the Senate. But the real teeth, the key mechanism, is all about data.
Data access.
Exactly. They now have to formally notify the Senate if they subpoena a lawmaker's personal electronic records or, search their Senate office data.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting because it's not just a heads up. It has serious punitive power. What happens if the DOJ or the FBI, they miss a step, they don't notify them?
And that's where the whole thing just explodes politically. A lawmaker who wasn't notified can now file a lawsuit, a civil action, directly against the United States government.
And if they win?
If they win, the law says they must be awarded $500,000 or more.
Wow.
In damages. And that's for each single violation by the government.
$500,000 minimum. That's just a shocking number. But the real strategic move here, the thing that made it an immediate crisis, was that this was all about past grievances, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The crucial detail, the part that's so strategic, is that the law applies retroactively.
All the way back to 2022.
Yes. So actions federal agencies took 2 years ago, actions that were not illegal at the time, are now retroactively grounds for a new, very lucrative lawsuit. It basically opens the door for potentially millions of dollars in payouts from investigations that were already happening. And to really understand why senators felt they needed this, we have to look at the incident that started it all, the Arctic frost investigation.
Right. This was special counsel Jack Smith's probe into the 2020 fake elector scheme.
A huge, sprawling investigation. But the accusation from Senate Republicans wasn't really about the scheme itself. It was about how Smith's team was getting its information.
So what was the specific complaint?
They accused Smith and the FBI of a pretty major political overreach. They said they obtained the phone records of 9 or maybe 10, one source says, GOP lawmakers using grand jury subpoenas, all without what they felt was proper notification.
And they argued this broke existing rules?
They did. They argued it violated existing protocols, even if those protocols were a bit, murky. And the records in question were sensitive. We're talking 4 days of data right around January 6, 2021.
But not the content of the calls, just the data, right?
That's an important point, yeah. It was metadata, not the actual conversations. And Smith's position was just that these were routine investigative steps.
So wait, the defense for this whole provision is this idea of institutional protection, right? Protecting the separation of powers, stopping the DOJ from being weaponized. But at the same time, they wrote a law that benefits them personally, financially, with retroactive payouts. Isn't that a huge contradiction?
That is the exact tension that has fueled all the criticism. A source defending the provision, they insisted the goal was constitutional, to stop future administrations from using the DOJ against their political enemies.
And the $500,000 penalty is just a deterrent, in their view.
It's the deterrent, yes.
Right.
But the critics, especially over in the House, they argue that the deterrent, which, let's be clear, is paid by the taxpayer directly to the lawmaker, is really just a pretext.
Yeah.
A pretext for self-enrichment. The strategic failure here was letting that huge immediate payout completely overshadow any kind of high-minded constitutional argument.
Okay, so let's shift from the policy to the politics. Let's look at the other side of the Capitol building. This language was reportedly slipped into a must-pass bill by Senate Republicans. So what was the reaction when House members found out what they'd just been forced to vote for?
It was, to put it mildly, absolute fury. House Speaker Mike Johnson said he was blindsided. He said he was very angry that this massive liability clause was, quote, dropped in at the last minute. He called it way out of line.
And he wasn't the only one.
Not at all. The House Appropriations Chairman, Tom Cole, said he was surprised. And on the other side of the aisle, the top Democrat, Rosa DeLauro, she slammed it immediately, said it was designed purely to funnel millions of dollars to the senators who are being investigated.
And the pushback was immediate, and it was framed almost entirely around the cost to taxpayers, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Representative John Rose introduced a bill to repeal the language almost instantly. He called it a poison pill. And he said very bluntly that it was shameful to ask taxpayers to shoulder the burden of paying U.S. senators at least $500,000. This brings up a really big equity issue. Because Representative Mike Kelly, he was the only House member whose records were also subpoenaed in that same Arctic frost investigation. And he asked publicly, why does this new privilege only apply to senators? Why not the House?
Yeah, that's a fair question. He's basically challenging the whole institutional protection argument. If it's about the institution, why not protect his institution?
Right. And the justification offered by people familiar with the drafting is pretty technical. They claim it only applies to senators because it amends an existing law to USC 6628 that already only applies to the Senate.
So they're saying they didn't create a new unequal law, they just plugged new liability into an old unequal law?
That's the argument. But you're right, it still results in a massive new financial liability for taxpayers that benefits only 100 people.
Does the source say why that original law was only for the Senate anyway?
And that's the key point that's still being debated. The reality is, just by tradition and by some specific statutes, the Senate keeps much stricter internal control over its records than the House does. So by building on that existing framework, they created this powerful new shield for themselves. But, whatever the technical reason, the outcome is a huge departure from normal law enforcement, giving this special lucrative privilege just to the upper chamber.
Okay, so the sheer political toxicity of this $500,000 payout, it must have become instant fodder for primary opponents. What stands out to you about how the actual senators involved responded once they realized the public knew they could cash in?
You just saw this deep, immediate split among the senators who were targeted. It really highlights the political danger of what they did. Some of them just embraced it. They leaned in, ready to make the government pay for what they saw as overreach.
Like Senator Lindsey Graham.
Senator Graham was completely upfront. He said he will definitely sue. He wants to make the remedy so painful no one ever does this again. He even went so far as to ask reporters, and if you think I'm going to settle this thing for $1 million, no.
So he's explicitly saying he's going to use the financial part as a weapon, a deterrent. What about the others?
Well, others were way more cautious, or they just, ran away from it because the political blowback was so fierce. Senator Tommy Tuberville said he would sue the living hell out of officials, but only if Jack Smith was disbarred and jailed, which is a very high conditional bar to set. And Senator Ron Johnson, he said he only supports it as a deterrent and would only sue to expose the corrupt weaponization of law enforcement. He made it very clear he wasn't after the money itself.
And it seems like most of them pretty quickly realized the optics of taking taxpayer money for this were just disastrous.
Disastrous is the word for it. The political cost was just too high almost overnight. Senator Bill Hagerty came out and said he was not seeking damages for myself, paid for with taxpayer dollars, end quote. And perhaps most strategically, Senator Marsha Blackburn's office clarified her plan was always to seek what's called a declaratory judgment.
Which means
a judge just rules on whether rights were violated, but without awarding any money. So she was explicitly not seeking the payout. And then, critically, an aide for Senator Dan Sullivan confirmed he would support the House bill to repeal the provision entirely. The backlash was so intense that some of the very senators who stood to benefit are now calling for its immediate repeal. And if you connect all of this to the bigger picture, the irony is just immense. The provision was successfully signed into law. It technically achieved its stated goal, right, creating this accountability mechanism. But by attaching a $500,000 guaranteed payout to it, the whole thing turned into this huge tactical mistake.
The political liability it created just forced their hand.
Exactly. It forced many of the senators who would benefit to publicly swear they won't even use the key enforcement tool, the money. So it raises this really important question. Can a provision like this, one that's meant for institutional accountability, even survive if its main enforcement power is just too politically toxic for anyone to actually use?
So where does that leave us? What does all this mean now? The language is literally the law of the land, but it sounds like its future is very uncertain.
Highly uncertain. The House is expected to pass a repeal bill very quickly. So the entire issue really now falls to the Senate leader, John Thune. Will he bring that House repeal bill to the floor for a vote? Or will this deeply controversial standard, this unique legal privilege for just 100 people, actually stick?
And so we'll leave you with this to think about. When you look at that separation of powers argument, where do you draw the line? Is this kind of special protection for lawmakers a necessary defense against the weaponization of federal agencies, a way to keep Congress independent? Or does it just create an unacceptable two-tiered system of justice where members of Congress get to play by a completely different set of rules than every other citizen?
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.